بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله وكفاه والصلاة والسلام على رسوله المصطفى وعلى عباده الذين ارتضى ومن بهداهم اهتدى وبآثار أهل المدينة اقتفى وبعد. السلام الله عليكم. أهلا وسهلا to today's dars. We left off في الدرس السابق in previous lesson with having completed Kitab al-Jum'ah. And we looked at all the ahkam that were to do with that, the actual Jum'ah, what were the arkan, the pillars, the concept or the ruling of the khutbah, people attending the masjid, where to read it, where not to read it, who's exempt. We took a look at those type of things, traveling on the day of Jum'ah and so on. That leads us up to Bab Salat al-Janaza. This will be the final bab of Kitab al-Salah, and then we'll begin Kitab al-Siyam. Once again, the thing being is that Sheikh al-Ashmawi, who's authored this text, hasn't or didn't intend to do an exhaustive attempt, neither like a comprehensive one, because that wasn't the objective. This book was, and it is very elementary, so it's aimed at people that are going to be doing other texts, following it, and other texts, and layers and layers. So there isn't this thing of like Salatul Eid or Istisqa or Kusuf or all these other things in detail really, and you're not going to find things like that. That's because it's not at this stage too necessary. Na'am, Babu Salat al-Janaza, and he's going to begin with Salat al-Janaza Fard, and we'll have somebody reading the text, if that's okay. أستاذ خليفة هل يعني معك النص؟ شكرا.
باب صلاة الجنازة. وصلاة الجنازة فرض على الكفاية، وأركانها 4: النية، و4 تكبيرات، والدعاء بينهن، والسلام.
شكرا. Now he begins by saying that what is the ruling of Salatul Janaza? And Janaza, first of all, it's talking about the funeral prayer for those of us that don't or know that already. And it generally is read Janaza with a fatha. It can have a kasra as well, so it could be read as well Jinaza, but al-afsah, and the better way to read it is Janaza. It is fardun ala al-kifaya. It is a communal obligation. So as long as some people within the community are doing this, it suffices. And one way to look at it is that it's a right of every Muslim that when he dies, given normal circumstances, that he has a haqq that he is prayed upon. Okay, so that's, if you see it like that, then it kind of changes. It's not so much about, it's like that person's right, that he has a right to, for example, that he's prayed upon, and a burial, like a ghusl and burial. Like these are almost like the huquq of a Muslim, which obviously he cannot fulfill or she cannot fulfill at that stage, but the community then lies upon them to kind of see to that. And there's an interesting hadith which we'll kind of take a look at later on as well, that has been transmitted, where it mentions that there is no mayyit, Muslimun mayyit, there is no dead Muslim upon whom 100 people kind of gather to pray his janazah and seek forgiveness, except Allah forgives for that person. So it's that's an interesting hadith as well, and obviously it's with the thing of that we are making dua for this person, because there's the idea as well that, look, the person may not have been like, we don't know how good the person was or how bad, whatever, but it may be that due to somebody else that's attended and made dua, that Allah accepts that person's dua fi haqq al-mayyit, regarding the dead person. So there's many type of interesting angles to it. So it's a communal obligation which has 4 pillars to it, okay, like 4 type of arkan, meaning 4 fundamental points or aspects of Salatul Janaza. The first, and this is and it's always paramount, niyyah, an intention, you know what you're doing. That it has takbirat, that means you say Allahu Akbar 4 times, Now, what du'a baynahunna, and that in between them you make du'a. And you'll see that really the way the Malikiya kind of look at this, and we'll go into this in a bit more detail shortly, is that the du'a is the key point. We don't have like the people of Medina, and in this there is amalu Ahl Medina, that this is like a mutawatir practice, like going back to the Prophet ﷺ, that there was nothing specified to be read within Salatul Janaza. So there was no, you must read Fatiha, or you must read this, or in fact, you'll see shortly, there isn't even a specified dua. Just wondering, why do you think that might be interesting? That there is no specified dua?
Would it be catered to the person? Maybe like the person you were praying and you might ask something subjective.
True. That.
The congregation, there can be many du'as.
Yeah.
There's no set on everyone's doing it.
No, mashallah. I mean, you mean also from perhaps maybe a language perspective or something like that. All of that as well, but also, I mean, and there's no right answer to this. I'm not saying this is definitely, this is, because obviously it's not in the Quran or Hadith why there isn't a dua, but an interesting perspective is, you see, when things are ritualized, that's what they become. Rituals. You see, like, so when we say, okay, the dua is Allahumma ighfir li hayyina wa mayyitina wa shahidina wa ghaibina wa saghirina wa kabirina wa dhakarina wa untha, and we start reading, it just becomes a ritual. And the hadith says that إِذَا صَلَّيْتُمْ عَلَى الْمَيِّتِ, it mentions فَأَخْلِصُوا لَهُ الدُّعَاء. That's a sahih hadith. And that when you pray upon, then be sincere, or try to make the dua the most sincere you possibly can. Now, in order to do that, we need to kind of almost kill the element of ritual in it. Kind of, if you understand. Because although it has to still be within the parameters of a salah and a takbir and so on. So the ritual is still there. It's not complete free in the sense of like you're just doing as you please. But the dua is not set, so you can come up. Like you can be sincere, because you'll be thinking, what should I say? You see what I mean? So there's an active process. That's something that just occurred to me. I thought I'd share it with you. But na'am, so du'a baynahunna was salam. And the salam at the end is a rukn of the janazah. Na'am.
Where does it say that it's amal?
This is from the amal. It's transmitted in many of the, I know Ibn Wahab transmits, I'm not sure if it's in the Mudawwana. It may actually be in the Muwatta as well, actually. But it's definitely transmitted in the Ummahat. Where they will say from, there's a transmission from Ibn Wahab. I mean, there's a transmission from many people, but there's a transmission from Ibn Wahab where he's saying from Imam Malik that he said, Laysa dhalika, and this is in response to like certain things which have been said before that. So if you look at the whole thing, it mentions that, this is in the Mudawwana, that it mentions that there is a dhikr, a mentioning of qira'ah, of recitation in the salah, from certain individuals from the Sahaba and the Tabi'een. This has been transmitted. After that is quoted, it then is followed by Ibn Wahab saying, وَقَالَ Malik. And then Malik said, لَيْسَ ذَلِكَ بِمَعْمُولٍ بِهِ بِبَلَدِنَا إِنَّمَا هُوَ الدُّعَاء. He said, that is not what is practiced in our city, in our town, meaning Medina. It is like simply dua. And then he said, إِنَّمَا هُوَ الدُّعَاء أَدْرَكْتُ أَهْلَ بَلَدِنَا عَلَى ذَلِكَ. He said, and that is what I have reached the people of this city upon. And by people, he means obviously the dons, the major, not just just a person just wandering about on the street saying, oh, this is what I do in Janazah, I ain't got a clue. Or it means obviously the legends of Medina. Naam.
ويدعو بما تيسر واستحسن ابن أبي زيد في رسالته أن يقول الحمد لله الذي أمات وأحيا والحمد لله الذي يحيي الموتى له العظمة والكبرياء والملك والقدرة والثناء وهو على كل شيء قدير.
Now, for those of you who also have access to the Risala course, or that you have gone through the Risala on your own or going through it, you'll see that Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, aka a Sheikh in the madhab, he's known as Sheikh. There's two, by the way. Who's the other? Al-Qabisi, Abul Hasan al-Qabisi, who was a contemporary and also lived in the same city as Ibn Abi Zayd. This Sheikh Ibn Abi Zayd, he in his Risala suggests certain du'as that like I recommend, or he doesn't say I, he says wa yustahsan, and it is good if a person read something like this. And we will shortly see several du'as which will be brought here. These are suggestions that have been presented by, like obviously Ibn Abi Zayd and some of the other Malikiyah. They are not prescriptive, they are not definitive, they are not something that we're saying you cannot go here and there from. It's just like, for some people, they might say, I've got no idea what to say. Give me an example. So here are some. Now, before we go into that, he did say, وَيَدْعُوا بِمَا تَيَسَّرَ. Like a person should make a dua with what is easy for them. Okay, so it's not about, remember, this isn't about takalluf. This isn't about kind of like becoming awkward or trying to be, it's about trying to keep things simple. And you have to remember, it's not about you or the other person or the congregation or whatever, it's about the dead person. That's what it's about. Na'am.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت ورحمت وباركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم إنه عبدك وابن عبدك وابن أمتك أنت خلقته ورزقته وأنت أمته وأنت تحييه وأنت أعلم بسره وعلانيته.
You'll see that he begins where he says, and Ibn Abi Zayd had mentioned this, that all praise is to Allah who brings life and death, and all praise be to Allah who brings back the dead to life. And he has, like, to Allah belongs all greatness, and he mentions an all dominion and power, and he's all capable and all powerful. And then he starts to send blessings upon the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he says, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad wa barik. And then he mentions upon the al of Muhammad, who, by the way, transmitted by Imam Malik, are the followers of Imam Malik and not the family of... as transmitted by Imam Malik, are the followers of the Prophet ﷺ. Well, it's alright. I think we'll have to review these recordings a lot more than I thought, actually. But as transmitted by Imam Malik, are the followers of the Prophet, not the family of the Prophet. Now, what's interesting is this taslim that he's brought here. It is a slightly controversial one, which he's kind of omitted the controversy from it. But it's interesting because he's left the second half, which shows you that it was that same one, you see. So there's Ibn Abi Zayd in his Risala has the same thing at the end, the section where he's going to mention this as well, that as-salatu was-salam upon the Prophet ﷺ. He also mentions Allahumma salli wa sallim and this, but he mentions warham Muhammadan, and have mercy upon Muhammad. Now the thing is that this became a huge controversy, that are you actually allowed to say that have mercy upon Muhammad? Like, meaning you're allowed to say send blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but what about saying like irham, have mercy upon him? Because it has a certain connotation to it that which seems as though like he's in need of, not in need in the sense that we're all in need of it, but it basically gives rise to certain issues and questions which made it quite controversial at the time. So you will see many of the ulama kind of spoke out about this from the Malikiyah, including the likes of Ibn Abdul Bar and the heavyweights like Qadi Abu ibn al-Arabi, Qadi Iyad. All these people kind of came out and spoke on this issue because of what Ibn Abi Zayd had said and because of his status, because he was known as young Malik. So he was such a major scholar within the madhab, mujtahid within the madhab. So when he said irham Muhammadan, So then Ibn Abdul Bar and these ulama say that, look, there is no hadith which is thabit, which includes the word irham, like have mercy upon Muhammad. So we should really, and Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi goes to the extent to say that, unfortunately the Shaykh committed a blunder. he says he's a legend, but he made a mistake here. And he says he committed a blunder by using this word, warham Muhammad, and we don't say that. And we stick to what the texts say. And the reason you can tell it's straight out there, because he says it in the second part. He says, وَرَحِمْتَ وَبَارَكْتَ عَلَى Ibrahim, and you had mercy. And you can see this is, but obviously Al-Ashmawi must have omitted the first part, recognizing the controversy to it. Then he follows up with the second dua, which is once again also a very amazing dua. Allahumma innahu abduk wa ibn abdik wa ibn amatik. That, oh Allah, he is your servant and the son of your servant and the son of your female servant. Anta khalaqtahu, that you created him, wa razaqtahu, and you provided for him, wa anta amattahu wa anta tuhi, and you gave him death and you will bring him back to life. Wa anta a'lam bi sirrihi wa alaniyatihi, and you are aware of what is in his inward, what his inward state is and his outward state. جِئْنَاكَ شُفَعَالَ فَشَفِّعْنَا فِي, we came to intercede for him, or this could be feminine as well, for her. فَشَفِّعْنَا فِي, so accept our intercession. نعم.
اللهم إنا نستجير بحبل جوارك له إنك ذو وفاء وذمة. اللهم قه من فتنة القبر ومن عذاب جهنم. اللهم اغفر له وارحمه واعف عنه وعافه وأكرم نزله ووسع مدخله واغسله بماء وثلج وبرد ونقه من الذنوب والخطايا كما ينقى الثوب الأبيض من الدنس وأبدله دارا خيرا من داره وأهلا خيرا من أهله وزوجا خيرا من زوجه.
And this once again is going to be a dua. All of these du'as, by the way, these ad'iyas have come from by way of sunan. Okay, so they're not just made up or put. Apart, I know that word which he hasn't included anyway was controversial, but generally all of these type of du'as will be found in different athar, in different sunan, in different ahadith. So he's saying the same thing, that we seek refuge in Allah, that he is somebody who Allah kind of like watches over, in the sense of fulfills his word. He's somebody who fulfills his promise, that protect this person from the fitna of the qabr, from the punishment of the hellfire. Forgive him, have mercy on him, honor him with his new abode and make it like vast, and wash him from his sins the way a white cloth is washed from its dirt. And then it mentions give him a better place than he had and a better family than he had, and so on and so forth. But once again, this is and as we'll see as we keep going, these are examples of du'as which are thabit fi dhatiha. So these ad'iyah, these du'as are proven in themselves, but they're an example for Salatul Janaza. Naam.
By the way, you don't have to say zawja, you can say zawj, even for a wife.
Right, yes you can. And actually what's interesting is Ibn Qarqul Ibn Qarqul speaks on this, mentioning one of the Maliki type of legends, who comments on, he's got following, a few of them did this, including Qadi Iyad. They took the ahadith from the Muwatta and the Sahihain, and they kind of made a dictionary out of all of these words, and expanding upon what, especially the difficult words that may be found in these three books can mean. And amongst they speak on the word zawj, where it's referring to a wife, and because generally zawj just means partner, and although it's commonly used for a wife with the ta'neeth at the end, but they actually say that it's actually better in several contexts to be used without the ta. But generally, to answer your question, na'am, you can. That's not a problem. Like Allah says that He created وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا. And the thing is that it's not something which has to always be said as zawja. like as in, zawjatun, like that. But now,
اللهم إن كان محسنا فزده في إحسانه وإن كان مسيئا فتجاوز عن سيئاته اللهم إنه قد نزل بك وأنت خير منزول به فقير إلى رحمتك وأنت غني عن عذابه اللهم ثبت عند المسألة
نعم
منطقه ولا تبله في قبره بما لا طاقة له به وألحقه بنبيه محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم اللهم لا تحرمنا أجره ولا تفتنا بعده.
And this once again another amazing dua, that Allahumma in kana muhsinan fazidhu fi ihsan, that if he is good, then increase him in his goodness, and if he's been bad, then just like forego the type of bad things that the person may have done. Allahumma innahu qad nazala bik, that he has come to you and he has really come to the best that he could possibly come to, meaning to Allah, and that he is so in need of your mercy, and that Allah is independent and not in any need of punishing this person. Like Allah says in the Quran, وَمَا يَفْعَلَ اللَّهُ بِعَذَابِكُمْ إِن شَكَرْتُمْ. And that, why does it concern Allah that He should punish you if you are grateful? That is like a verse of the Quran, that it doesn't, like Allah is independent and not in any need of punishing anybody. Allahumma thabbit عند المسألة منطقة, that when this person is asked, give him steadfastness, that in his grave, do not try him with that which he has no strength, and make him reach, or group him with, or make him reach the Prophet ﷺ. And then it's interesting, and do not deprive us of his reward. Like, meaning that a person could, and this could be in many ways, obviously one, the reward of actually being there, the janazah, it could have been of other type of rewards and so on, which could also have been communal and going on. And then it mentions وَلَا تَفْتِنَّا بَعْدَ, and do not try us, as in make us the object of a fitna after this person. Naam.
تقول ذلك بإثر كل تكبيرة وتقول بعد الرابعة اللهم اغفر لحينا وميتنا وحاضرنا وغائبنا وصغيرنا وكبيرنا وذكرنا وأنثانا إنك تعلم متقلبنا ومثوانا واغفر لنا ولوالدينا ولمن سبقنا بالإيمان مغفرة عزما وللمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات اللهم من أحييته منا فأحيه على الإيمان ومن توفيته منا فتوفه على الإسلام وأسعدنا بلقائك وطيبنا للموت وطيبه لنا واجعل فيه راحتنا ومسرتنا ثم تسلم.
Right, okay, now some rulings there. He says that, well, what you do is you say that dua after each takbirah. Now really, I mean, it doesn't, for many people who have experienced the Salat al-Janaza, it's a lot more rapid than that. They don't normally give you that type of time between each takbir. So all those du'as that he's mentioned, and he's saying just put that between one takbir. That would probably be like the entire janazah. So, but the point is, he's saying that you say that after each. As an example, you say after each takbir, but after the fourth, and there is a difference as well, by the way. There is a difference, and we'll see that more in detail as we start going into the next layer of texts. There's a difference between many of the ulama within the Maliki madhab as well, about once you say the fourth takbir, should it just be immediately followed by the salam, or are you supposed to be saying a dua after it as well? Many people after the fourth takbir do just straight away go to the salam, but I mean, it's once again, nothing is prescribed, it's not set in stone. You have this option. He's suggesting you say after that, Allahumma fir li hayyina wa mayyitina, a very popular dua, forgive our dead, our alive, our living, those who are present, those who are absent, those who are young, those who are old, the male and female amongst us, that Allah knows our outcome, forgive for us, our parents and those who have preceded us with iman, in such a way, like a resolute forgiveness, like completely. And then he mentions that and this includes the Muslimin wal Muslimat wal Mu'minin wal Mu'minat. really there's a bit of an overlap there. Obviously, mu'min, Muslim is an overlap, but it's kind of emphasized that, and this is an interesting part of the dua, Allahumma man ahyaytahu minna fa ahya lil iman, that those who you and I'm sure I have actually come across this in the reverse order as well, but he mentions that Allahumma man ahyaytahu minna fa ahya lil iman wa man tawaffaytahu minna fa tawaffahu ala al islam. But I'm sure, Ustad Khalifa, have you read it the other way as well, or because ahyaytahu minna fa ala al islam, because I would have thought that would have made more sense. No, because the reason I'm saying that, although they both are fine and both are valid, but what he's saying is, oh Allah, those who you choose to keep alive amongst us, then he said keep alive upon faith and take upon Islam, which is obviously just as, absolutely correct. The other wording is the other way, that keep alive upon Islam and take upon faith. And the reason that perhaps is interesting, it's interesting to me, is because Iman is the hidden aspect and Islam is the outward, the practicality. So you have Iman, Islam. Islam is the 5 pillars, and Iman is what you believe. So when you are alive, you are practicing the pillars. So you're practicing the Salah, the Psalm, this, and that you are kept alive on that. But when it comes to the point of death, that you are taken upon Iman.
Maybe they're looking at from the perspective of Quranic
Muslimun. No, they're both correct. There's nothing wrong with that. I was just saying that the other one I found interesting in the sense that because when you die, you're not actually doing an action, it's the inner state that's more important. But they're both, none are incorrect or anything. They're both valid. So he says, وَأَسْعِدْنَا بِلِقَائِكَ, and that please us with our meeting with you. And then he mentions that وَجْعَلْ فِيهِ رَاحَةً وَمْسَرًا, and that make our meeting, but it can also, in some riwayat, you have that even death, make it for us a source of kind of comfort, if you like. So in some other hadith you have where it mentions that وَجْعَلْ حَيَاتَنَا زِيَادَةً فِي كُلِّ بِرٍ, that make our life an increment, an increasing state, if you like, of goodness. وَالْمَوْتِ رَاحَةً مِّن كُلِّ شَرٍ, and make our death a type of freedom, if you like, or relaxation from all badness. That just God damn, like that. No more bills. No, that's not the I went to one lecture once where the guy was I think the professor, the only thing he said dying can't be that bad, at least. And the only thing he went on about was there won't be bills. Well, okay, so na'am.
Mufti, is that out of the 4 takbeers, does the opening one, the ihram, count as one of the 4?
That's a very good question. Yeah, it does. Allahu Akbar, yes it is. It's the first, and then you've got I have to sometimes the simplest of questions can catch you off guard, and you got to kind of think about that. That's a very good point. Would it count as of course, yes.
But I think
no, because there is a mas'ala in generally the 4 madhabs have kind of agreed upon the 4 takbirat of janazah. But yet there are aqwal which say 5, they go up to 7. And the Ghamaris have actually written a whole thing on this, trying to push the other opinion of many more takbirat within the janazah. But the point is, there are riwayat. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody counted it as 5. But there's actually some which say 5. There's some who have said 7 takbirat within janazah. I don't personally, it isn't so disturbing to me personally. Generally the understanding is it's 4, that's how the practice has been, that's how we'll do it. But it's a bit similar in a way to the Eid type of takbirat, the way there's ikhtilaf over that, whether according to some, there'll be 6 extra in total, according to some there'll be 6 extra in 1 rak'ah, and according to some it'll be 7. So the difference there as well is a similar type of interpretation. So it's I mean, it's not too far-fetched that some people would have debated that. نعم.
وإن كانت الصلاة على امرأة قلت اللهم إنها أمتك ثم تتمادى بذكرها على التأنيث غير أنك لا تقول وأبدلها زوجا خيرا من زوجها لأنها قد تكون زوجا في الجنة لزوجها في الدنيا ونساء الجنة مقصورات على أزواجهن لا يبغين بهم بدلا.
Okay. I'll let Ustad Khalifa just translate that and in light of political correctness I will move on to the next. Now what he's saying is that if it was a woman, then obviously you use the feminine pronoun, and really didn't really say much more after that. No, and then he says that except you don't say that, oh Allah, give her a partner better than her partner, because in the understanding that the women of the dunya are with their husbands in Jannah. And then he mentions that, and the women of Jannah do not are very extremely monogamous. That's what he's saying. He says مقصورات على أزواجهن, that they do not لا يبغين بهم بدلا, that they do not want somebody else. So that's that is actually also an interesting type of discussion, because once, this is many years ago, I was asked a question. This was actually, I think, when I was like, it was just a topic that came up. And then during my studies, we came across an athar, like a hadith. But the question was that, okay, so if the woman has been married many times, like let's say with different husbands and so on, that who would she be with in Jannah? That was the question. And it was an interesting question. I mean, the text we eventually found, was, I believe it was transmitted from Abu Darda, and Darda actually, and the reason she chose not to marry again after him, that she said that I heard the Prophet ﷺ said that the woman would be with the last husband that she was married to. I mean, I'm not saying that's a definitive response, but there is that athar. But it was an interesting mas'ala nevertheless. So, na'am.
وإن أدركت جنازة ولم تعلم أذكر هي أم أنثى قلت اللهم إنها نسمتك ثم تمادى بذكرها على التأنيث لأن النسمة تشمل الذكر والأنثى.
And if you reached somebody, which would be more interesting as well, this in the sense that, A, if you did not know that they were male or female, or if the gender was somewhat confusing, then you could always just use the term in Arabic, which is nasama, which means a soul. Like, oh, this is your soul, oh Allah. And the term soul in Arabic, nasama, and nasama isn't just soul in the sense like the spiritual soul. Like that's obviously ruh, but nasama is usually used to kind of like count out individuals as well. Like even in a census, for example, when they're doing that, they will say so many nasama. They won't say so many like people in the sense. They'll use the term nasama. But that's what it kind of means anyway. It gives that meaning of like the way in English we might say, oh, you know, this is what, like a soul, like not in a spiritual or religious sense, but when it's just used. And that's it really. He's saying, and the term is feminine, so it would include both the male and female linguistically. Naam. Is Nasmatul Mu'min is? Tata. Oh, yes. Are you talking about the one where that it will fly about until it? But that's more about the actual ruh, isn't it? And I mean that's one of the that's also one of the confusing type of. I say confusing in the sense that there's a few hadith which speak about the type of passage after death, if you like, and because obviously it's unavailable to us. Like now, even understanding it is very difficult. So in some hadith, it comes in the sense of a person like kind of floating with a bird through the heavens, and in some it comes as no, it's with the body. In some it comes its return. In some it goes, it meets others, and it's quite. There's some what can we say, like diverse descriptions, and what that exactly means and how it is, what the reality is. I mean, the truth is we simply don't know. But we've got some insights into saying, well, there is some, because there are certain riwayat that it will go and it will meet people that would have died before, and they would ask, oh, so like they'll catch up. And that's what the hadith says, they'll catch up with stuff. They'll say, oh, so listen, you know, what happened with this and this then? And the person will say, oh, this happened. So what happened with that that revolution? Was it successful? What happened then with the world state affairs? And the person will ask, and they'll tell the people and say this is. And so it's, but how this happens, when it happens, is this straight before the questioning? Is it after the questioning? Is it... There are like diverse type of athar, and the truth is nobody really knows.
I thought this was near this one about in the birds, specifically for the martyrs. Don't say that they're dead, their souls are in birds flying in Jannah.
No, that's in Jannah, yeah, you're right. That one is in Jannah. This is immediately after death. That there is some that they will kind of go up, and there's a description that it will kind of go on each type of heaven, and like as long as it's a good believer, and it will be asked.
This is just a nasama, not in birds.
I'm not even sure if it uses the word nasama here, but it just describes a Muslim generally.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it uses the term nasama. But nasama generally just means an individual, like without going into anything generic. That's it really. Naam.
وإن كانت الصلاة على طفل قلت ما تقدم من النية والتكبيرات والدعاء غير أنه يستحب أن تقول بعد الثناء على الله والصلاة على النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم اللهم إنه عبدك وابن عبدك أنت خلقته.
Yep, and he mentions that if it was upon a child, you say what has been said. There is the niyyah, the same type of arkan stand, the takbirat, the dua, except it's recommended that you also say تقول بعد الثناء على الله, that after having praised Allah and sent blessings upon the Messenger of Allah, that you say اللهم إن عبدك وابن عبدك أنت خلقته. I mean, the same type of thing really coming on. He's gonna go into a bit more yet. He's gonna mention نعم.
ورزقته وأنت أمته وأنت تحييه اللهم اجعله لوالديه سلفا وذخرا وفرة وأجرا وثقل به موازينهما وأعظم به أجورهما ولا تحرمنا إياهما أجرا.
So this is the difference. So he says, well, if it's a child, you add this thing in, which is really just different in the sense that make him a precedent for his parents, and also like an investment for them in a positive understanding, that something wafaratan, something that the farat is something which beats you to something. It kind of like it precedes you and it was used as well sometimes in like races, and when the Arabs had, whether they were racing horses or whatever, something that beats you to something. And the point is that is what this child is, like he's somebody who beat his parents to the goodness, like to Jannah, and that make him be a cause for the scales of his parents to be weightened. Naam.
وأعظم به أجورهما ولا تحرمنا وإياهما أجرا ولا تفتنا وإياهما بعدا اللهم ألحقه بصالح سلف المؤمنين في كفالة إبراهيم وأبدله دارا خيرا من داره وأهلا خيرا من أهله وعافه من فتنة القبر ومن عذاب جهنم تقول ذلك بإثر كل تكبيرة وتقول بعد الرابع اللهم اغفر لأسلافنا وأفراتنا ولمن سبقنا بالإيمان.
Right, so really the only difference in those wordings is where you'll mention things like, oh Allah, where he says Allahumma alhiqu bi salih salaf al-mu'min. That's not too much of a difference, but he says fi kafalati Ibrahim, that because there is a hadith that Ibrahim alayhi salam will be kind of like taking care of Muslim children who have died young, and like there's different ways of looking at it. Is that in Jannah we're talking about outside of Jannah in the state before? Because one question is, isn't everybody that goes to Jannah of a certain age, and And so it becomes quite interesting when and how this takes place. And that really just comes back to, look, we don't really understand truly the states of the akhirah. And it's difficult to kind of truly grasp them. All we can do is get some insight and just try and picture something, that's all. So he mentions that that's the only difference really. And also where the person says, oh Allah, forgive for those people who went before us, he also mentions the word wa afratina, and those who kind of beat us to it, meaning the children as well amongst them. What's interesting is that in the Muwatta, there is a transmission from Yahya ibn Sa'id, who's from some of the great ulama of Medina, who transmits from Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib radiyallahu an, one of the greatest tabi'een, and obviously the 7 fuqaha of Medina, who says he prayed behind Abu Hurairah in a Salat al-Janaza. Now he is, by the way, he's Abu Hurairah's, how is he related to son-in-law? He's his son-in-law. He's the son-in-law of Abu Hurairah. Now he says he prayed behind Abu Hurairah in a janaza which was upon a child that was innocent, meaning like, you know, just a few years old, nothing like a child that couldn't really have committed sins or stuff like this. And he says, and I heard him say in a dua that Allahumma a'idhu min azab an-nar. That I heard him say, oh Allah, protect him from the punishment of the fire. You see, the thing is that there are certain things which are kind of a bit ritual as well, that we do say them regardless, okay? And with the understanding, we do have the understanding, there is a difference of opinion amongst ulama, what happens to children eschatologically, in the akhirah sense, like what happens to them. So there's several opinions. Generally, we believe the more of the debate is actually the children of the non-Muslims as opposed to the children of the Muslims. There is a debate, and there's several, some say 7, 8, 9 different opinions in there. But the point is that what is generally believed about children is that they will be, inshallah, in Jannah. That is a general type of understanding. Although what many ulama have also said is that we will just, like on the day of judgment, Allah will just judge, and that's what we say. And there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said to Aisha that Allahu a'lam bima kanu amilin, that Allah is more knowledgeable about what they would have done. But and then there's somewhere, you know, wa alhaqna, like the verse wa alhaqna bihim dhurriyatahum, and we put the progeny with the parents. Like, so obviously that's in a dunya, but some people have applied that to the akhirah as well, and some people, but generally with the children of the Muslims, more or less everybody is unanimous that they will be in Jannah bi-idhnillah, bi-fadlillah. And as to the children of non-Muslims, many will also believe, if not perhaps, I mean, if I can say most, but definitely many believe that they will also be in Jannah, or there will be tawqif, in the sense that Allah will judge between them on the day of judgment. And some come up with, that they will be tested. And that's a bit problematic, because the akhirah is not daru taklif. It's not really a realm in which Allah tests people. The test is now over, it's complete. So, and what's interesting is this was also one of the, you see, we have an understanding that, like Allah says in the Quran, لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون, that Allah is not asked about what He does, they are asked, the people. So we have this understanding that Allah can do as He pleases. Now, how that's also historically interesting is what is commonly represented as Ahl Sunnah, if you like, the Ash'ari type of school of theology. This really begins with this slight type of digression or this understanding of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, which emerges with a debate around this. And it's actually quite interesting, because his is it Abdul Jabbar or Abu Ali al-Jabba'i, who he's debating with? I think it may have been Abu Ali al-Jabba'i, who's one of the major Mu'tazili type of scholars at the time. And the thing is that Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari presents a scenario to him. And he says, I'd like you to kind of tell me, how would you respond to this? He says that there's 3 people and they all die. That amongst them there is a Muslim, there is a non-Muslim, and there is a child. And we could say Muslim child. Yeah. So he says, okay, he says that's simple, because the Mu'tazila have their certain beliefs known as like al-usul al-khamsa, the 5 principles, and then as Ibn Hazm says, وَبَعْدَ ذَلِكَ اخْتَلَفُوا فِي مَا بَيْنَهُم, then they have a difference of opinion after that amongst them. But amongst these things, one of them is that Allah must be just. That Allah is adl, and that Allah will only decree that which is more right, more deserving. So, a person says, that's simple. Says the Muslim will go to heaven because he believed in Allah, inshallah. The non-Muslim will go to hell, he says. And he says, and the child will go to heaven. So, Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari says, okay, would you say that the child and the Muslim, and by the way, this Muslim, he does describe him as an abid, like a worshipper. He says, would you say that they both are in the same darja, same status in heaven? And he said, no, but he said, of course not. That would kind of be in contrast to the justice of Allah, because one has obviously worshipped for several years of his life and therefore attained a maqam. So he would obviously be of a higher status. So Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari asks him, yeah, but the child would say, but that's not my fault. That you killed me, that you took my life. Had you let me be, I would have also done more and attained this maqam. So here the response is that, well, not quite with that though, but that if he says that Allah will say to this person that, but you don't know. You see, had I let you live, you may have committed more sins, which may have actually dragged you to Jahannam. So I actually did you a favor by taking you whilst you were a child. So he says at this stage, Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari says, the kafir will say, so why didn't you do this favor upon me? So it defies the concept of justice. So this type of almost enigma that was presented by Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari to the shuyukh of the Mu'tazila at the time, they could not respond to it. And it was one of the things that kind of led to the split of this whole theological movement. But that's something else for another time, another day. But that was a small little anecdote there. Na'am.
اللهم من أحييته منا فأحيه على الإيمان ومن توفيته منا فتوفه على الإسلام واغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات ثم تسلم والله أعلم.
This once again, the dua, similar to what we just heard before about who you keep alive amongst us upon Iman and who you take upon Islam, and forgive for all the Muslims. Generally people, as just to sum up, Janaza, it is done standing up. It has no ruku', it has no sujood. A person, they stay still. It has 4 takbeers, beginning, the first of them beginning with takbirat al-tahrim. In between, you have a choice within the Maliki madhab whether you choose to raise your hands. You raise it for the first, do you raise it for the ones after that? There is a choice within the madhab, and we will see more of these differences as we start going through the following layers of the fiqhi texts. But you do have a choice. If you choose to raise it, you can do. If you choose to drop it, it's not too much of a problem. The main thing is you make dua. There is no Fatiha. If a person chooses to read Fatiha, it's not a problem. It's not like, there is no prohibition. If a person chooses to read a set dua, there is no prohibition, there is no problem. It may even be a good thing for that person if they don't know what else to say. But the main thing is أخلصوا له الدعاء. Following the 4th takbir, what generally takes place is the salam will begin. So people will do salam, and they'll either do 1 or 2, and that's the same as the salah within the madhab. So it's not a problem either one, whether you do 1 or 2. and that's it. And people kind of, and you don't need to do it, like if you do qabd, let's say if you do qabd, people have this type of strange type of tradition of, I'll show you guys, right? They have this, what they'll do is, I'll have to put this there, they'll kind of go like, they'll go like Allahu Akbar, and then they go Assalamu alaikum. They go Assalamu alaikum. I don't know what the dropping the one arm at a time with each salam signifies, but you don't need to kind of do anything wacko like that. You can simply just do both salams. If you're gonna do two salams, then do both, and that's it. Then just drop your arms. Or if you're doing sadal anyway, it doesn't really make too much of a problem. Or if you're doing one, then there you go.
So do you do Rafal Yadayn with every takbir?
Personally, I do, but I mean, there's both opinions within the madhab, and you'll see that it's not really a problem whatsoever. It's not considered problematic. They are, at all, if a person chose to do it.
Did the early Malikis recite Fatiha over the dead in graves? Because if they did, then why didn't they do it in the Janaza?
Sorry, what are we talking about?
You know when they went to visit the graves?
When we went to visit the
Yeah.
graves.
So did the early Malikis recite Fatiha over the dead?
Like say Fatiha, like the way we say Fatiha,
Yeah.
like that.
But if they did...
I mean, have you read somewhere that they did?
No, I'm asking. I know the later ones do, but did the early ones?
No, because the early Maliki were very, like if it wasn't proven, established from the Sunnah, they kind of weren't too much down with it. So that wasn't too much of a trend back then. Like, the let's go to graves and read Fatiha. It wasn't too much of a trend then. I mean, later on it became very common. But I mean, in the early stage, so I'd be very surprised if anybody said that. The closest you have is that quote from Ibn Habib, where he said, "Iqra ala mawtakum Yasin," and that read Surah Yasin upon the dead. And that too, he says it in the context of where they haven't actually died, but mawtakum here, you're dead, is actually it's actually metaphorical, in the sense that they're about to be dead.
You just walk up to someone and start reciting.
And he thinks, damn, is this my last, am I going? That's great. If he knows the Masail, I think it's going to be a bit of an issue. He's going to be, guys, you're supposed to be giving me hope. But,
you mentioned about Sayyid ibn Musayyab, about him hearing Abu Huraira.
mhm.
And he said he heard that dua. Was Abu Huraira reading the Janaza alive?
See, that's interesting. How did he hear it? I don't think he would have been reading it aloud in the sense like that, but maybe he just kind of overheard him saying it like kind of slightly, or it may be interpreted in the sense that it may have been after the Janazah, in the sense he just heard him make a dua. I'm just saying it could also.
Is there evidence then for reading the Janaza out loud?
No, they don't generally do it aloud. I mean, Allahu A'lam, I won't say nobody's ever said it, but I'm not aware that the madhabs generally do that.
Yeah, so if people did read it out aloud, would there be an issue with it now then? Because it's not proven from textually.
Yeah, because the thing is, it's contrary to the Sunnah, isn't it?
So would it come under being a bid'ah then?
In order to make sure Ibn Abbas and reading Fatiha.
Okay, I'm not sure actually. Not sure. He read it aloud.
And it was said that he ready to teach people and he was like Fatiha in the Janaza.
Okay, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that. I know that there are a hadith from people that say that I prayed, which are sahih, where they say that I prayed behind the Prophet, I prayed behind Abu Bakr, I prayed behind Umar, I prayed behind Uthman, and none of them ever read anything like specific in the in the Janaza.
So how do you know that then if it's quiet though?
No, that's a good question.
Well,
Except
saying that they could tell what the Prophet was reciting by the movement of his beard and that even the sign of voice.
no, but that's in a different, and that's for Fatiha in normal Salah, not in Janaza. But that's a good question. How do you know that how you would know is in the understanding that, you see, you're not just, if somebody says that I used to pray these things behind all these people starting from the Prophet right down to the time of Uthman, it means this person remained in Medina. And he would have been educated in those issues to say that.
So that doesn't mean that when the person's making a statement like that, does not necessarily mean it's God's
don't necessarily mean that they prayed behind that person and that's how they understood it, or it's an understanding through their teaching.
Yeah, I mean, that is how you're right. Ultimately, like a similar transmission is made about the Bismillah as well. A similar thing, like a similar riwayat where they say, I prayed behind this person and this person, and they wouldn't read the Bismillah. But the question is that you mean you never heard them read the Bismillah, because they would say it silently, or they would just stay silent. But so there is that question, well, how do you know that they weren't reading a set thing? The understanding is that when the person is, his statement of I used to pray behind these people is symbolic for the fact that, meaning my salah is like the salah of these people and we don't do that. It's kind of, but you're right, it can still be questioned.
Because if you knew that, if you'd asked the person, you would have said it, you would have put the statement in a different manner.
Not necessarily. Like it could, you see, like for example, it could be said like this: I asked this person, I was taught by this person, and I was taught by this person, and I was taught by this person, and none of them taught me to do this. Or it could have been said as in, you know, I prayed Janaza with all of these people and we never used to do this.
But isn't this the way
So-
say when you say this, you know, we like prayed behind them one day, and we prayed them for a time.
No, this is that one, that where he says, but what I was saying, he says that, where he says, فَسَمِعْتُ يَقُولُ, I heard him say, my general understanding would have been, you know, when you ask me that, my general understanding would have been that sometimes when people are making dua, like even in salah, sometimes it becomes slightly audible. But it doesn't mean audible in an audible qira'ah sense. It's not like in a alhamdulillah, but rather in the sense that sometimes, you know, when a person's saying like Rabbana atina fid dunya, and so like if they're making some dua, if you were praying next to the person or behind the person or as a one-off, they might say something uncontrollably aloud. But that's, so you hear sometimes there's some transmissions from, I believe they're actually from the Prophet ﷺ as well, that on some occasions some things he said aloud in a silent prayer. And it wasn't the sense that he didn't read it aloud like the way you do your normal imamah. It's just that these things were like just certain outbursts now and then, which in line with the nature of the context really. So it wasn't something, it was just something, if it happened naturally, it happened. It wasn't a, but what I was saying is it isn't too far to interpret that dua could have been made after the janazah as well. I'm just saying, the main point of him stating that thing was not that he is saying that whether it was aloud or silent. He was trying to prove the point that even if the person is sinless, you still mention Allahumma a'idhu min adhab an-nar. That was the purpose why he mentioned that. It wasn't to prove the other thing. The other thing is by isharatun nas, or by really from its dalala. It's not by the ibaratun nas. It's not what the nas was actually brought for, if that makes sense.
How do they reconcile between the hadith La salata liman lam yaqra bi Fatiha al-kitab?
Yeah, true. That's the Shafi'i understanding of La salata liman lam yaqra bi Fatiha al-kitab. Therefore, how is this salah valid because we don't have Fatiha? Well, really that answer is so simple that what's wrong with Imam Shafi'i? That answer is the answer is so simple that there is no salah either without sujood. There is no salah without ruku'. There is no this salah clearly is not one of those salahs, is it? Like, I mean, realistically, don't get me wrong, but when you have a salah, the only thing that can be carried from the obligations of a salah by the imam is the Fatiha.
Yeah, but there's no hadith.
So like when a person is praying,
Yeah.
no, but there is no salah without sujood. Right, so no, but this is the debate. This is the debate on whether this is called Salatul Janaza then, or does salah here just mean Du'a'ul Janaza? So the point is that since we know that, like when you've got arkan of salah, and Qira'atul Fatiha is one of them, the ruku is one, sujood is one, qiyam is one, qu'ud is one, all of these things. Now, the only one which the imam can actually carry for his muqtadeen, for his ma'mumeen, is just the Fatiha. So it shows that that's actually the weakest out of all of them. in the sense that that one can actually, so if you joined a salah of the imam and you missed the Fatiha and went straight into ruku, you've still got that rak'ah even though you missed an obligatory act. And because it's the only obligation that the imam can carry for his congregation. Yet, so therefore it shows it's the weakest out of all of them. Yet, this salah does not have any of the, or many, it doesn't have many of the other obligations. So to really just question it on the Fatiha and to say, yeah, I think that's a bit of a weak angle really. Although the Shafi'iyya do use it as their point that, yeah, you know, la salata illa bi fatihatil kitab. But it's like you gotta tell them, look, all right guys, don't worry about it. We got this when it comes to fiqh. Don't worry about it.
So is it proven then that you need wudu for it then as well then?
Right, that's a good point. That's a good point. The point is, no, it is a good point actually, because if it isn't a salah, does it, see this is it, does it require the obligations of salah? Generally, as the Malikiyya and many of the other madhabs as well, do recognize this as salah. And they don't recognize the word salah to be linguistic, they recognize it to be technical. However, they say this is exempt from many of the normal things of salah. Like, so for example, there's many derogations, there's many, like, it doesn't have ruku', it doesn't have sujood, it doesn't, because sometimes, you see, the definition of salah is ibadatun dhatu arkanin, and they go on and so on, and they say that it's like this, dhatu arkanin min qiyamin wa qira'atin wa qu'udin wa salamin, and the whole thing. But this obviously won't fit that definition. But that's because it's different. But that is a good point. It's actually a good question. And these questions, I'll tell you who tackles them quite interestingly is Ibn Hazm. Although he takes perhaps different.
But what's the answer?
Yes, you do. No, the answer is yes. You definitely need wudu, yeah.
What about also then the timings of when you can pray them, for example, you know, this salah will come and then, it's not for then, is it nawafil, it's under sunnah?
No, I mean, it's fard kifaya, but you don't pray it in the times of when, I mean,
can you pray, like,
you don't pray obviously in the times when you're totally not meant to be praying salah. So for example, during actual sunrise, or during sunset, whilst the sun's actually setting, those two times you don't pray. What about before then, in the makruh time? So after Asr has kicked in or after Subh has kicked in, generally they say that you know, it's better to avoid it, but the Malikiyya do allow it actually. They say that if it needed to, because you don't want the Janaza just hanging, lingering on. Like, you know, let's say you say, oh no, let's just keep the dead body here whilst we wait another 1-2 hours for, and whilst the body's obviously going through all its whatever it is, and you can imagine hot countries as well and stuff like this. So the thing is, what they would say is if it's a makruh time, just pray. The other, you know, the forbidden times don't last long anyway. You're only talking, you know, whether it's 15 minutes or whatever, it's not going to be hours and so on. So.
And also the place then, you know, is it from the sunnah to pray the Janaza prayer where you're going to bury it as opposed to the mosque where it's opposed?
No, you don't pray where you're going to bury. You don't pray in the no, you don't pray in the burial ground. Because, right, no, but this is the interesting thing. In the Maliki madhab, you can kind of pray in the masjid, as you can in the Hanafi madhab as well. And the thing is, there are certain riwayat from Aisha radiallahu anha and other people who say that, oh, how ma asra an nas, how quickly basically people forget the sunnah and the practice of the Prophet. She says that the Prophet prayed so-and-so's janazah right here in the masjid, and people today, because she asked for a certain body to be brought into the masjid so she could see, and they said that no, like, you know, they said, oh, we ain't going to bring a body into the masjid. And she made that response that, you know, the Prophet ﷺ prayed the janazah in the masjid. Generally, I think within the Malikiyya, within the Hanafiyya, they do pray in the masjid. They do pray outside as well. They don't just, I'm not saying it's restricted to a masjid. So, depends where. Here, obviously, you're restricted. Right, obviously. In other Muslim countries, they just pray sometimes in an open, an open yard. Yeah, exactly. So, quite often, obviously, in Muslim countries, everybody understands what. So let's say if there was where there is, usually it's very right that where you've got a graveyard, you'll have fields close by, or you have something, some type of public. Sometimes I've seen places where they've just prayed it on a road, close to, like, they've blocked off a whole thing and prayed it there. And
so you're not allowed to pray it
No, the thing is, in the graveyard, it's just that the Prophet ﷺ said certain places you shouldn't pray salah in, and amongst them one was in the maqabir, in the graveyard. So we don't generally pray the salah, although it is valid if it was prayed in the graveyard, but you don't pray in the graveyard.
In this country, some people might pray in the graveyard because they do it just.
Do they already? Do they do that?
Well,
Okay. Do they do that?
It's
Okay.
just in the area where there isn't any graves, but they.
I mean, fair enough. I mean, look, everything. Do they? Okay. You see, everything has to be in its own socio-type or geographical context, really. So you can't say, like in some parts of the world, obviously, if it's a Muslim country, it's much more accommodating. They understand Janaza. In a non-Muslim country, you're limited by either it's going to be in the masjid, or if it's not going to be in the masjid, it's going to have to be in some type of a center or some type of, like, you're not going to really, I mean, you could even, like, I'm just saying, if somebody did it in a park, they could do it. In a graveyard, if you've got a certain place, the only thing is, you see, in Islam, there is this thing of dhara'i, where you stop certain things from leading to other things. You don't want to create a culture where people are praying in graveyards, because that leads to the understanding of what some people may think it's okay to pray to graves and to actual, and this also stops that from happening. So this is perhaps one of the wisdoms to why the Prophet ﷺ said don't pray in the graveyards. But if it was, let's say here, like I said, in this country, if there's a certain place, and we know people ain't praying to the graves anyway, if there's a certain place where, look, why don't we just do the janazah here and do the burial, then that's fine, inshallah. It's not a problem. And you got to remember some things, like the fact that graves, even historically, were like, whenever the need arose, they were overturned and the whole thing, and the land was reused. And so, for example, many people don't perhaps know this, that the Prophet's mosque was built upon the graveyard. So
how does this go with the hadith that you just mentioned?
Yeah, because that's whilst it is in a state of being a graveyard. This is obviously the Prophet's mosque. Obviously, it's not in it. What type of question is that? That's as interesting as the question once when we were sitting in a Bukhari dars, and the person was asking our teacher, like our teacher was going over this hadith about the person who came to the Prophet ﷺ and took the sword, and he said, well, who's going to save you from me? And the Prophet ﷺ, he got the sword from him and said, well, who would save you from me now? And it's a famous type of hadith. And then eventually the person kind of dies. And so the person asks, he said, like really sincerely, and this is in the final year of the scholar course, he said, so did the Prophet ﷺ kill him, or did he kill the Prophet ﷺ? and the Ustad just looked at him and said, is this guy for real? He said, he's in the final year of the Alim course, and he's asking me that question.
It's not that God.
Oh well, it was. I was the. So anyway, coming back to. So the thing is. So the thing is that now, the Prophet's masjid was actually built upon what was an overturned. It wasn't a graveyard, active graveyard at the time. It was historically a graveyard. But many people actually don't know that. So just to kind of like give you a bit of insight there. Let's start. Shall we start very quickly? Kitab al-Siyam, a bit of Kitab al-Siyam, and then let me just see how much we've done. Yeah, I think a few minutes of Kitab al-Siyam, and then we could, inshallah, wrap it up. So, Bab al-Siyam, or Kitab al-Siyam, Na'am.
وصوم رمضان فريضة يثبت بكمال شعبان أو برؤية عدلين للهلال أو جماعة مستفيضة وكذلك في الفطر.
Shukran. Sawm Ramadan, this is an obligation which is known bil-darura, almost, whatever that means. I know there's a debate amongst the ulama when you say something is known bil-darura, it's known by necessity. It goes into this whole, which I won't get into that philosophical debate. We have enough of that in our Irshad al-Fahul dars. Alright, but the point is, Sawm Ramadan, fasting Ramadan, is a clear obligation, it's a clear pillar of Islam. It's something which, although most ulama do not believe that if a person unintentionally abandoned it, oh sorry, intentionally, not abandoned is strong, neglected it is a better word. So if they conscientiously neglected Ramadan, have they left the fold of Islam? Few, like amongst them al-Maliki ibn Habib al-Maliki, actually believe that they have. Because he believes the way if a person neglects Salah, becomes a kafir, he believes that expands and extends to the 5 pillars of Islam. But he is very individual and isolated in this opinion. This month, Ramadan...
Sorry, does he say neglecting any one of the 5 pillars, that person would fall into being a kafir?
Yeah.
Anyone? So
Yeah.
if he prays Salah but he neglected, let's say, Ramadan,
Yeah.
he would be a kafir?
Yeah, like he says that basically it's kufr. It's actual kufr. It's not just not playing with words. He has a... It's surprising because he's kind of, I don't know, like some... You know what's interesting is when you read people's books sometimes, a bit of their books, sometimes they're a bit different to what you picture, and sometimes some of their fatwa are a bit different. So sometimes you picture like this almost, you get from some of their rulings almost a bit more of a, like a chilled out type of, I don't know, it's difficult to explain, like a reflection of the person. But then you read some of his books and he's very, like, stamps out what he... But he was definitely a legendary Maliki, but he was unique on some of these opinions. He was responsible. I mean, he's like the student of the students of Imam Malik. And he has the famous book, the Wadiha, which is known as al-Wadiha fi Sunan. And it's one of the Ummahat, the mother texts, so to speak, right? The major texts within the madhab. And he was responsible for hugely influencing a certain amount of thought or scholarly thought within Al-Andalus. So he was obviously from Qurtuba. He really is just after, really, or, you know, in rank, if you like, the likes of Yahya ibn Yahya, coming after those, but he was one of the key type of, or the chief advisors to the judiciary board, the state judiciary board within Al-Andalus. And he had huge influence, Ibn Habib al-Maliki. And he was an absolute, and he was also interesting because I'll tell you who he's rivaled in a way, kind of, because there's I mean, I suppose that's not the better way to put it, but the thing is, he takes his route, if you like, of learning. He doesn't go through the normal Sahnun from the Ibn al-Qasim and Ibn Wahab and those. His route is different. His route is more through Asbagh and Majishun and Ibn al-Nafi and the Medinan type of Malikiyah. That's why his opinions are sometimes quite different, but they're very authoritative. The only thing is he was criticized for hadith. They said that he's and he has a book. He has a few books which are in print now, small, like on Jannah, Kitab al-Firdaus. He has one, Adab al-Nisa, which has recently been brought into print as well. He's got his brief description of the words of the Muwatta has been brought into print. But he is a Don scholar. There is a little, I'll tell you what, I'll mention a little anecdote about him. There was a time where he, what was his brother's name? Does anybody remember? Was it Harun? But I mean, he has a brother. Yeah, the blasphemous. Yeah. Yeah. So he has a brother who is extremely. Was he called Harun? I can't remember. Huh? It must have been since. It makes sense now. No, but his brother is one of these incredibly controversial type of. When I say controversial, like sarcastic type of individuals, who, in the time, he's kind of just sick to death of the clergy. And he like really, and he says anything to provoke them. And he comes out with this one, like there's a few occasions. Qadi Iyad brings this story in his tartib, where on this one occasion, some people come to collect charity to build a masjid. And he says, what's the cause So they say, oh, we're expanding, or we want to build this masjid. And he says, no. He says, but if you want to build a cathedral, then I'll contribute to it. And so they obviously, this is like one of the statements. There's other statements that he's made, like where he said, what did he say? Once he was quite ill, in a bit of pain, and he said, yeah, he said, he said, I've kind of, he said, like, they asked him, what are you going through? He said, God. He said, I can't explain. And he said to them something like, he said that, he said something about Abu Bakr and Umar. Yeah, he said, like, if they were afflicted with this, they would have given up. But it's a different thing that I'm still, like, hanging on here. But he's kind of like, he made some really type of blasphemous statements in his time. And unsurprisingly, I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but the Malikiya are kind of a bit ruthless for their judiciary. They were always known as, many of them were Qadis, they were always Qadis, Qadi this, Qadi that, Qadi this.
His brother was the one that said he should miss a prayer, careful.
No, that's an example, but you know, the other thing is that the Qadi, you see, the Malikiya have generally been chilled out as a madhab and as fuqaha. But you know what, as judges, I'll tell you an area that they've been extremely strict in, and that is blasphemy. They've been like just really weirdly super strict in the area of blasphemy.
Why are they playing after
Doc, they've been really. So the thing is that, like, and they would execute people, like issue capital punishment over what you might think are the littlest of things if they insulted or in any way. Like, to the extent, I'll give you examples where somebody said something like, oh, the Prophet was like miskin, or like they had capital punishment issued. That several, this is one example where they would not think twice on capital punishment. On other things, they've been actually quite very relaxed, surprisingly, when you hear the stories of Al-Andalus in Spain. But on this, they were really strict. Now, because this guy, his brother got done for blasphemy. So blasphemy was like a place you don't want to go, right? So now they arrested him and they issued, they kind of gave the judgment for capital punishment. So his brother Ibn Habib's brother was going to be executed. So he finds out, now because of his brother's attitude anyway, they weren't on talking terms. And not surprisingly, since he has the opinion, he's on one side and he's on another. But when he finds out that, oh, they're going to execute him, so what he does is he actually goes to the judiciary board and says that he wants, because he was not on the judiciary board at the time, but he was like a supreme advisor to the judiciary board. Like, he had one of those key figures of key roles within the country. So he kind of goes to the board and says to them he wants his case reviewed. And then they say to him, okay, fair enough, like he's allowed to appeal to it. And he then presents a refutation, like in defense of his brother, where he writes like a whole document where he writes that this wording could have meant this, and this could have meant this, and the fact that Abu Bakr and Umar, he could have been referring to this, and all this, and blah, blah, blah. Puts all these, and then he puts in the hadith that al-hudud tantari'u bi-shubahat, that the hudud, the capital punishment, the had has to be removed if there is a shubha, any type of doubt. And then at the very least, he says that in conclusion, that I believe that at the very least, there is doubt, and this isn't conclusive. Therefore, the had cannot apply, but other punishments can, and he kind of leaves it. And then they actually, his kind of appeal comes through, and so they actually waiver the capital punishment for his brother, but he gets certain other punishments, but he isn't executed or anything. And then he goes to his brother actually and tells him, he says, I've done that, and I never want to see you again. Right.
Those are his words. That's what he said.
No, I mean, no, but he basically says he says no, he doesn't. He says like, I've had it with you, like this, like we're through, basically, I've too much cleaning up after you. I've done enough now. Like, don't.
I'm not bailing you out again, basically.
But he says to him that because of this bond of kinship, I did this as one last thing for you that I felt.
Can you get the blood from Dr. Abbas?
Doc, can your brother do anything, work any wonders?
He works for me.
So, damn. So, okay, so that was interesting. So sometimes it's interesting to actually learn about these scholars as well, not just their opinions, but a bit about them, to read about them. It kind of brings them to life when you kind of speak about them. So, na'am. So, Sawm Ramadan is an obligation which is established by either Sha'ban becoming complete, not our Sha'ban here, because I'm not sure what complete would mean in that context then, or by the witnessing of two, or by the testimony of two witnesses that they have seen the moon.
You know, do you, it says ru'ya and not shahada.
Yeah.
Is that significant, or is it just using them interchangeably? Because there's a debate about is it a ru'ya or shahada?
No, the ru'ya has to be done by two at least. No, it has to be done at least by two. So it is a ru'ya. And then they are testifying. And the difference is it a riwayah or a shahada, which is a whole different discussion. We'll go through that some other time on what on earth is the difference between saying I transmit something and saying I witnessed something. But inshallah, I'll leave you in a bit of suspense for that. But I will tell you before we come to that at some point that
I mean, in the Ramadan context is whether it's actually being testified in front of the Qadi, or if somebody just informs you that you've seen it.
yeah, but generally, what is the difference? And I'll tell you what's interesting. Qarafi says, he says, for 8 years I sought an answer to this and I couldn't find it.
That's commitment.
All right, whoa. Anyway,
Did you find the answer?
he gives the answer. He says he eventually found it. He eventually found it, but after 8 years. So he found it by who? The legendary Mazari had answered it. Right, so the point is that the moon has to be seen by at least two people, or a jama'a mustafida, meaning unanimously, like there has to be a mass, it has to have been witnessed en masse, in the sense that so many people have seen it, that you know, whoa, there's definitely, like I would say in our context, and generally as it has been throughout Muslim history, the majority of it, Muslims always look out for the moon on Ramadan and Eid. So for these things, when you've got millions of people witnessing the moon, that really, I mean, ideally, and if the sky is clear, then even two does it does trigger some alarm bells, really, that how can it be that when millions of people are looking for and the sky is clear, we're not talking about when it's cloudy, when it's absolutely clear and everybody's looking out for the moon, and only two, and nobody else, there's like negative testimonies from everywhere else. What makes it worse in our day and age is if that's been countered by like data from the observatory and stuff like this, saying that it's actually impossible for the moon to have been seen, and people have looked out and nobody's been able to see it except two people, then I think that's definitely, such evidence is inadmissible. You can't actually really rely on stuff like that. But the thing, and this is not just the view of, obviously this is Sahnun's view that he's put there, Jama'at Mustafida, but it's also Abu Hanifa's view as well, in the sense that if there was a cloudy type of sky, then there should be many people that have seen, a clear sky, then there should be many people. If there's a cloudy sky, then two is sufficient. Now, and likewise in Eid al-Fitr, some of the ulama have debated that for Ramadan, do you really need two, or is one sufficient? Because there are some ahadith that where one person came and the Prophet ﷺ said, are you Muslim, and so on, and then okay, it's Ramadan. However, they are all, and so Abu Bakr ibn Arabi is of that opinion, one suffices and so on. But for Eid, they are all unanimous that it must be two. Except Abu Thawr, who we are kind of not really taking into consideration at this point. But the reason being, there's more of a tuhma, there's more of a reason to be kind of like, I don't know, like to be wanting to see the moon, and therefore at the very least, even if we have good intentions that the person isn't making it up, they may have just hallucinated, or because they want it to be Eid, whereas people don't want it to be Ramadan necessarily. Do
you know what you're saying with two people, but can you now using that the hadith, can it be any two people, or does it have to be people that know what they're looking for?
Okay, generally by the rules, as long as they were Muslim and they were sane and they knew what they were doing and so on, and then it would be valid. It wouldn't have to be like two technicians, for example, or one engineer and one cardiologist. Oh.
Yeah, but if you were to ask the normal Muslims, you know what you're looking for, or at that point, most people don't know really what they're looking for.
Right, okay, I see your point. You see,
around circle of the moon.
no, to be fair, generally in Muslim countries, they tend to know what they're looking for. In this part of the world where we don't have a custom of looking out for the moon, you're right here. Because what is interesting is some of the Baghdadiyin bring this into discussion as well, that what if they are, I think it's Ibn al-Jallab actually brings it into discussion, that what if that, okay, two people, but what if they claim to have been looking in different directions or something like this? And then you've got, because this is a whole debate which other ulama have said as well, that what if, for example, two people said we've seen the moon, but one said it was this way and one said it's that way. You see, now you've got, because they've both claimed that they've seen it, but there is a problem. Because they're not describing it with accuracy, so something's wrong. Now, but if a person saw the moon themselves, let's say a person saw the moon, but two other people, he got it wrong, or there was nobody to corroborate his testimony, he himself or she herself would fast. Okay, but not the people. They can't instruct people to fast. Like you can't do it like that. You can't impose it on others. Now,
with this word ru'ya, is he basically making a statement that you can't use calculations? Number one, and number two, he doesn't say where. So basically, if there's a ru'ya on the other side of the world, is he basically saying that's valid, like in theory?
you see,
based on his wording.
You see, his wording just simply hasn't gone into it at all. The reason being is, I think, in my understanding, it may have just been for brevity. They want to keep it simple. We want to keep it like, for obviously this was for younger people. We don't want to include all the discussions. I would think the ru'ya thing is interesting, definitely, because generally the madhabs were not too keen, except the Ba'd al-Shafi'iyya and some Baghdadiyin from the Malikiyya, were not too keen on the scientific type of thing of trying to determine the moon. So they were quite expressive on saying it must be the ru'ya. This is why even today we say that the observatory, like the data shouldn't be in conflict, and it should just corroborate what's actually. So for example, if the observatory says that, okay, the moon will be witnessed, let's say over huge parts of North Africa tonight. Now, really that's not enough. We wait for the witnessing and then it's declared. You see what I mean? The problem, like, so we kind of both go hand in hand. What we don't do is, we definitely don't do, like, even if you had no data and you just saw the moon, that's sufficient as well. What is unacceptable is if the data conflicts with the sighting, and the sighting in itself is questionable. So like what we have today, the Saudi phenomenon is obviously problematic. But
so, Mufti, you know, like the Ramadan that just went now,
yeah,
there was international observatory saying that it was visible in Peru.
we're not talking about Harun's dad, we're talking about the month Ramadan. Okay. His name's Ramadan as well.
So, okay. So we have that.
Unless he's in Peru.
Saying that occurs, or say for example, just a hypothetical scenario where the moon is visible in certain parts of South America, for example, and then it's witnessed by two people that have gone out for that specific purpose of seeing the moon. And then say for example you can't see it, and it's not visible in most of the Islamic world, quote unquote. If it's not visible, so does that mean even though the moon exists and the moon's there, like in the sense that the moon has been sighted in parts of the world, does the rest of the world then follow that?
You see, there's many debates on this and discussions.
Right.
So for example, one of the opinions is that wherever the moon is sighted, anything west of that can follow, but anything east of it doesn't. And
Is that in the
that's also quoted by some ulama. Generally in the Maliki madhab, you see, historically they've been kind of, they weren't for their time vague, but for our time it seems a bit vague what they've transmitted. Like they said, in many places they said, oh yeah, wherever the moon is seen, it's sufficient. Wherever they've seen it, it's sufficient. It's fine, wherever you do it. But then they say, oh, but by the way, Hijaz, which is Saudi region, is way too far from Andalus. So we're obviously not talking about that. So you kind of have to question, well, wait a minute, what are they talking about then? So when they say that, oh yeah, nah, wherever you see, yeah, just do it. They weren't talking about like global in the way we understand global today. Because we today, the world has become so accessible.
Yeah.
So when somebody says, you know, in some island at the bottom of South America, they've seen the moon, and nowhere else in the world, and now the whole world would do Eid based on that. I think that would be a bit weird, actually. Personally, I think, in my personal thing, I think every country should go by its own horizon. However, it is valid to follow a universal and global sighting, as long as it doesn't contradict with the data. And the fact that other Muslims are doing it and you want to go with the Muslims of it, then it's fine. But I guarantee you, Saudi Arabia would never follow any other sighting from any other part of the world. They would never follow it from any, like, it's always Saudi Arabia that sees the moon. Like, they never follow somebody else, because they themselves believe actually in a regional sighting. They don't actually believe in a global, although they argue for the global sighting, but they don't actually push. Many of the ulama have actually said stuff like this as well, that, you know, well, people should be looking. They say we don't tell people to be following us and this and that and so on and the whole thing.
But Charlie, they're not all liars.
Huh?
We make out like they're all liars.
No, but no, they're not liars. Do you know what? Yeah, no, Doc's mate. Doc, you know what? I think we need to kind of clarify for Doc really, and for other people. No. On a fair point, Doc has got a point, right? That look, this isn't like an anti-Saudi banter, which it's not. But what it is unfortunately, this is what it is. Unfortunately, what seems to be happening year in, year out, yeah, is that there seems to be a conflict almost year in, year out with the observatory readings. There seems to be only, like, what happens is 2-3 people in some part, and it's usually what the interviews I watched, which were on YouTube, and like people going around interviewing, were usually, it's always the same region almost of Saudi Arabia. That no, I don't think it was nudged actually, but I wouldn't be surprised. But
it's all right. They're not all liars.
Right now, no. But the thing is that look, when I watched one of the interviews, they asked a sheikh, because I think 2 years back there was a Saudi type. He was a Saudi astronomer or something, and he was also like a scientist, and he made a big deal about it that year. About, you know, this is, I've had enough and this is nonsense, and he went out to the press and made this whole thing about Saudi, why are they getting it wrong, and they kind of like, obviously, like the whole embarrassment is coming back on all of Saudi Arabia, and he was saying this, and so he's being interviewed, and I watched that interview, and it was on YouTube, and then after his interview they're interviewing other mashayikh from Saudi Arabia and saying, what do you have to say? I think his name was Khalid something. What do you have to say about Dr. Khalid, whatever he's saying about these things? And their responses, and these were the mashayikh, you see, they were being asked that, what do you have to say? He's saying that, how can the moon be witnessed by these 2-3 people when the observatory said it's impossible? And why is it always just these 2-3 people? And he said, why is it always this region? He was the one, and he was an indigenous Saudi, saying, why is it always that region? And he was saying that, look, this was impossible and blah, 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 and they should stop, you know, playing around with stuff like this, take it seriously. And I mean, he didn't mention this point, what I'm about to say. And by the way, then this is a key point as well. It's very difficult to get transparency from the Saudi authorities. And this has been one of the reasons, on a side note, why for some of the years, even Green Lane here, like when Maulana Abdul Hadi refused to follow Saudi Arabia, when he gave his interview, and I know then he almost like, all hell broke loose, and he had to kind of sidetrack, but the point is, when he did make that interview, one of the reasons he said was that he actually contacted the authorities, like personally, and they said they wanted disclosure and transparency on the methods and the witnesses and who and what was going on and how is it reported and they completely refused any cooperation. And this is why, like, if you're not even transmitting if you're not even transparent about what is your method, like, so for example, when you speak to, like, even, believe it or not, and they're nowhere like leaders and stuff, but like Pakistan and how they've set up their Ru'yatul Hilal committee. Like each region has a certified office, each region has certain people, anybody that sees it has to corroborate it with the regional office, who has to corroborate it with the central office, and then it gets announced. Like you have something, transparency. No, so the point is, anyway, when they ask these scholars, that what do you have to say about this? Do you know seriously what some of their responses were? They said, look, are you trying to say that, because they said that, look, oh, but the observatory said it was impossible and so on. And they said, but are you trying to say Allah is not qadirun ala kulli shay, that He's not all powerful? So is it, this was seriously his response to this, and it was on YouTube, it was like and he said, are you trying to say Allah is not qadir ala kulli shay, that Allah couldn't choose to show the moon to these 2-3 people if He wanted to? I thought, well, you know, Allah isn't going to change the law of nature just for 2-3 Bedouins so they can like celebrate Eid a day earlier. He's not going to change the law of physics just to make them happy. It doesn't work like that.
You say you don't believe in the karamat of the awliya of
So anyway, that's the so you got to look at the so we've got to understand the whole context to it. So it is seriously a bit, I'm saying this, I know this is recorded, I was going to say, it's very like the responses sometimes come out in a very retarded type of way about like, oh, it's like this, Allah is all powerful, so duh, He could change this, obviously He can make either day early for these people. It doesn't work quite like that. You've got to, at the very least, let's not have conflict in data. So I'm not saying let's go, but I'm not saying we just announce Eid and stuff based on observatory reports. I'm saying there should be citing, but there should be no conflict between these. So that's at the very least.
Who was the scholars from Baghdad that you mentioned?
You know what? The Malikiya mention, they say what they say وَبَعْضُ الْبَغْدَادِيِّينَ مِنَ الْمَالِكِيَّة, and maybe they didn't want to be named, and this is why people didn't name them. Because this was actually historically was looked down upon, the whole taking the astronomy route. But today our technology has changed as well. So, and I'm pretty certain if they saw the accuracy that people have today, they wouldn't have been as kind of like suspicious about the whole process. So that was the thing. Right, now, so just, I tell you what, just finishing off this paragraph. What we have is وَيُبَيِّتُ الصَّيَامِ فِي أَوَّلِهِ وَلَيْسَ عَلَيْهِ الْبَيَاتِ فِي بَقِيَّةِ. And the thing is that a person must have a niyyah for fasting, but that the Malikiyya say as long as you know Ramadan is coming, that's sufficient. So let's say today it was Maghrib time. Now I've stuffed myself and like I've just fallen asleep. Or even worse, and this would be really bad for somebody, if whilst they were fasting they fell asleep and then they woke up and they've slept right through iftar and sahur. That would be really bad. But let's just say if something like that happened, as tragic as that may be, this person didn't have niyyah for the next day that he was fasting, because he didn't even know that time's come upon him. But the Malikiyya say as long as Ramadan is kicked in and you know you will be fasting for Ramadan, that carries right across Ramadan. You don't need to be saying every day did I know I was going to be fasting. No, it doesn't. It's not. So yep. So as long as when Ramadan approaches, you know, right, it's Ramadan and I will be fasting in Ramadan, that yakfi, that's sufficient. That suffices and sufficient.
Does that cause a bit of a problem with when they say that if you then have to break it, or if you're traveling or something?
No, but even then, as long as you know, like really intention is just this, as the ulama say, that if you were having sahur and somebody asked you, what are you doing? And you said, well, I'm eating food. And they asked you, why are you eating? You said, because I'm going to be fasting in a moment. So that is enough. It is not a talaffuz, it is not a wording, it is not an utterance, it's just knowing what you're doing. That's it. Right, and it is obviously, we know it's from dawn till sunset, and we mean by sunset after sunset. Just as a reminder, guys, that when we're talking about sunrise, it's always the beginning, the inception. But when we talk about sunset, it's the completion. Okay. There's, what is it, one short paragraph, one short sentence, we can read that and then inshallah just wrap up inshallah. وَمِنَ السُنَّةِ
ومن السنة تعجيل الفطر وتأخير السحور وحيث ثبت الشهر قبل الفجر وجب الصوم وإن لم يثبت إلا بعد الفجر وجب الإمساك ولا بد من قضاء ذلك اليوم.
Okay, so and from the sunnah is to hasten to hasten with your iftar. Like once you've opened your fast, you shouldn't be still lingering on not eating. But if there's a reason and it's just relative, then it's cool, it's not a problem. Like let's say I'm driving home, I don't have anything with me, I don't have a drink, I don't have anything, I'll be home in 20 minutes. I mean, if you've got something, have it. If you don't, it's not a problem. It's not, like, don't need to freak out. Some people freak out, oh my God, I need to quickly eat something, I need to quickly, just relax. Like, there are certain athar where some of the Sahaba, including Ibn Umar and other people, were traveling, and you know, because they were traveling when they got there, they opened, it's no big deal. But the problem, why is this emphasized so much? So it doesn't become a false type of rahbaniyah. What we don't want is people to somehow start thinking, you know what, start thinking this somehow, like I do a good thing. I not only fast up until sunset, but I actually do a bit more. And that would actually be haram, to have that mindset, right? Because you are actually going not only against the sunnah, you're going against the word of the Quran. وَأَتِمُّ الصِّيَامَ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ, not into the layl. So you don't, but it doesn't mean that if it wasn't for that intention, it's not too much of a problem. You know, it's for convenience. Just to understand that, because some people do freak out. However, with sahur, it's better to delay your sahur, and that obviously once again is common sense. That, you know, so some people do sometimes say, look, and if it's convenient for them, that look, I have to do my sahur at midnight and then go to sleep, and because I've got to wake up for work, or I can't do this, I can't. You know, okay, it's not, you know, they can do that. It should not be done for any religious reasons, and it's better, religiously speaking, from the sunnah to do this just before fajr. Okay, but if you choose not to for convenience, then fine. وحيث ثبت الشهر قبل الفجر وجب الصوم وإن لم يثبت إلا بعد الفجر وجب الإمساك. Okay, ولا بد من قضاء ذلك اليوم. If a person was to find out that it's actually Ramadan and he did not know, but somebody told him at Fajr time, that's a bit raw. They could have told him half an hour earlier and he could have eaten. That person goes, wait there, let me just finish eating, then I'll phone him. So now if somebody tells this person that, look, oh, by the way, today's Ramadan, and so if it's beyond Fajr, then the person has to stop eating. I mean, they can't, and they have to maintain abstinence for that day. But because they didn't have an intention before it actually kicked in, and it's already kicked in, and we're talking about if it's already kicked in, then you would have to make up that day, because you didn't have intention for it. But if you knew before, like let's say it's Fajr time, and you find out, all right, it's shortly going to be Fajr time, and you find out, right, it's Ramadan, you can quickly eat whatever you can, and you've got intention, so it's fine. So inshallah, with that, we're going to take a look at next session a bit more on intention. Then he'll go into what breaks it, the conditions of validity, the conditions of obligation, a bit of the kafara, and we'll try and really, inshallah, finish the whole remaining text next dars, inshallah. So with that in mind, آخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.